The story of Moses begins in a dark period for the Hebrews. After the death of Joseph, the people of Israel continued to grow in Egypt. Around 1526 years before Christ, a new pharaoh, who did not know Joseph, assumed the throne and began to fear the growing power of the Hebrews. To control them, he enslaved the people and imposed forced labor, including the construction of the cities of Pithom and Ramesses in the northeastern Nile Delta. Additionally, he ordered the killing of all newborn Hebrew boys. It was in this brutal context that Moses, from the tribe of Levi, was born. His mother, Jochebed, hid him for 3 months. When she could no longer conceal him, she prepared a basket of reeds, coated it with bitumen and pitch, and placed it among the reeds of the Nile River. Pharaoh's daughter discovered the baby, took pity on him, and adopted him as her own, naming him Moses, meaning drawn from the water. Raised as an Egyptian prince, Moses received a royal education and courtly training, yet he never forgot his Hebrew roots. Around 1486 years before Christ, at the age of 40, Acts 7:23, Moses witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Moved by compassion, he killed the attacker. When he realized the murder had become known, he fled Egypt toward the Midian Desert, located east of the Sinai Peninsula, in what is now Saudi Arabia. There, Moses found refuge with Jethro, the priest of Midian, and married Zipporah, one of Jethro's daughters. For 40 years, he worked as a shepherd, guiding flocks through the arid wilderness between Mount Horeb and the desert. At 80 years old, while tending his father-in-law's flock, Moses arrived at Mount Horeb, also called Mount Sinai. There, he experienced a life-changing encounter. God appeared to him in a burning bush that blazed without being consumed. From within the flames, God called Moses by name and commissioned him for a divine mission, to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Fearful and hesitant, Moses raised objections. "I am not eloquent. I cannot speak well. How will I convince Pharaoh or the people?" But God assured him, promising his presence and sending Aaron, Moses' brother, as his spokesman. As a sign of divine authority, God granted Moses miraculous powers, turning his staff into a serpent and afflicting his hand with leprosy before healing it. Moses then left Midian with his family and returned to Egypt. Along the way, he had a mysterious encounter with the Lord, who sought to kill him. But Moses was spared after circumcising his son, reaffirming his covenant with God. Back in Egypt, Moses and Aaron confronted Pharaoh, possibly Ramses II or another ruler according to historical theories, with God's command, "Let my people go." Pharaoh refused and instead intensified the Hebrews' suffering. The people turned against Moses, but God renewed his promise of deliverance. Then came the 10 plagues, divine judgments upon Egypt. Water turned to blood frogs, lice flies, pestilence on livestock boils, hail locusts, darkness, debt H of the firstborn. These plagues devastated Egypt but spared the Israelites. Before the final plague, God instituted Passover, a sacred observance where each Hebrew family sacrificed a lamb and marked their doorposts with its blood. When the angel of death passed through Egypt, he struck down the firstborn of every Egyptian household, including Pharaoh's son, but passed over the homes marked with blood. Around 1446 BC, a grief-stricken Pharaoh finally relented. 600,000 Hebrew men, along with women, children, and livestock, left Egypt under Moses' leadership. They departed from Ramesses, heading towards Succoth and then Etham on the edge of the desert. God guided them by day with a pillar of cloud and by night with a pillar of fire. But Pharaoh, regretting his decision, sent his army in pursuit. The Israelites found themselves trapped, the Red Sea before them, the Egyptian army behind. At God's command, Moses stretched out his staff and the waters parted, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. When the Egyptians followed, the sea collapsed upon them, drowning Pharaoh's forces. With this miraculous victory, Moses and the people sang praises to God, finally free. After crossing the Red Sea, around 1446 BC, Moses led the Israelites into the wilderness, a journey marked by miracles, trials, and divine encounters. Leaving the eastern shore, they entered the desert of Shur. After 3 days without water, they reached Marah, where the bitter waters were miraculously made drinkable. After Moses cried out to God, God showed Moses a piece of wood to cast into the bitter waters, making them drinkable. They then continued on to Elim, where they found 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, a rare and welcome respite in the arid environment. From there, they moved on to the desert of Sin, located between Elim and Sinai. In the 2nd month after leaving Egypt, the people began to complain of hunger, remembering the days in Egypt when they had meat and bread, despite being enslaved. In response, God sent manna, a food that fell like dew from the sky in the morning, and quail, birds that appeared in the evening, providing meat. These miraculous provisions sustained the Israelites for 40 years in the desert. God instructed them to gather manna daily, except on the 7th day, the Sabbath, thereby establishing the practice of weekly rest as part of their covenant with Him. Continuing their journey, they arrived at Rephidim, where once again there was no water. The people murmured and accused Moses of bringing them to die of thirst. God commanded Moses to strike a rock on Mount Horeb, from which water gushed forth to satisfy the people. Rephidim was also the site of the Israelites' first battle against the Amalekites. Moses climbed a hill with God's staff in his hands, and as long as he held his arms up, Israel prevailed. When he grew tired, Aaron and Hur supported his arms, and Joshua led the Israelites to victory. Soon after, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, visited the camp and advised Moses to appoint leaders to judge the simpler cases, allowing Moses to focus on the more complex ones. This advice helped to better organize a population of about 2 million, including men, women, and children. In the 3rd month after leaving Egypt, the Israelites reached the foot of Mount Sinai, also known as Horeb, possibly located in the southern region of the Sinai Peninsula. They camped there, and it was at this site that one of the most significant events in biblical history occurred, the covenant between God and Israel. Moses ascended the mountain where God proposed a pact. If the people obeyed his voice and kept his covenant, they would become a special people, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The people unanimously agreed to follow God's commands. God then instructed the people to prepare and purify themselves, and not to approach the mountain for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Mount Sinai was covered in smoke. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the sound of trumpets grew louder. God descended upon the mountain. Moses went up alone and received the 10 commandments, written by the finger of God on stone tablets. These commandments became the moral and spiritual foundation of the covenant, emphasizing exclusive worship of the Lord, reverence for His name, observance of the Sabbath, honoring one's parents, and prohibitions against murder, adultery, theft, false testimony, and covetousness. While Moses remained on the mountain for 40 days and nights, the people grew impatient and feared he had died. They pressured Aaron to create a god to lead them. Aaron collected gold earrings and molded a golden calf, declaring, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." The people celebrated with feasts, dancing, and sacrifices before the idol. On the mountain, God revealed this sin to Moses and threatened to destroy the people, proposing to begin anew with Moses. But Moses interceded, appealing to God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Coming down from the mountain and witnessing the idolatry, Moses was filled with righteous anger. He smashed the tablets at the foot of the mountain and destroyed the golden calf, grinding it into powder. He rebuked Aaron and ordered the Levites to punish the rebels. That day, about 3,000 men died. Afterwards, Moses returned to God and pleaded for forgiveness, even offering his own life as atonement. God forgave the people but declared that he would no longer accompany them due to their hardness of heart. Moses pitched a tent outside the camp to meet with God, and there he spoke with the Lord as one speaks with a friend. He begged for God's presence to remain with them, and God renewed his promise. Moses also asked to see God's glory. God responded that no one could see his face and live, but allowed Moses to see his back while sheltering him in the cleft of a rock. New stone tablets were carved, and Moses ascended Mount Sinai once again, remaining there for another 40 days. He received the law anew, along with detailed instructions for the construction of the tabernacle, a sacred tent where God would dwell among his people. The now repentant Israelites generously offered gold, silver, fabric, skins, and wood for its construction. Craftsmen like Bezalel and Aholiab were divinely gifted to complete the work with excellence. The tabernacle was erected and consecrated along with the priests. The glory of the Lord filled the tent so powerfully that Moses could not enter. The cloud that covered the tabernacle signaled when the people should set out or remain camped. God was now dwelling among them, guiding their every step. With the covenant restored and the law re-established, the people were ready to journey toward the promised land, a path still filled with challenges, but now with a renewed identity as God's chosen people. After about a year at Mount Sinai, during which they received divine laws and instructions, the Israelites resumed their journey toward the promised land around 1445 BC. During this time, the tabernacle was completed, the covenant with God renewed, and the Levites designated for priestly service. A census counted approximately 603,550 men of military age, indicating a population of over 2 million. Leaving Sinai, they traveled to Kadesh Barnea in the desert of Paran, south of Canaan. Along the way, they experienced further episodes of rebellion and divine judgment, such as in Taberah, Kibroth Hattaavah, and Hazeroth. At Kadesh, Moses sent 12 spies to explore Canaan. After 40 days, they returned with reports of a fertile land. However, the people, fearing the inhabitants, refused to proceed. As a result, they were condemned to wander the desert for 40 years. During this time, they passed through Kadesh again, where Moses disobeyed God by striking the rock instead of speaking to it. For this act, he lost the right to enter the promised land. The rebellion of Korah also took place during this period. The Israelites then bypassed Edom and advanced to the east of Canaan, defeating the Amorite kings Sihon and Og and conquering territory between the Arnon and Jabbok rivers up to Bashan. These lands were given to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. Finally, the Israelites camped on the plains of Moab by the Jordan River, across from Jericho. There they faced one final crisis, the episode of Baal Peor. Moses, now 120 years old, climbed Mount Nebo, looked out over the promised land, and died. Joshua succeeded him as leader and prepared the people to cross the Jordan and take possession of Canaan.